The liberalization of Europe's passenger rail market didn't begin overnight. Since the 1990s, the European Union has been steadily pushing to break up national rail monopolies. Early reforms focused on separating infrastructure from train operations and opening freight markets. Passenger rail, however, remained largely protected, with state-owned companies dominating domestic services in almost every country. The real turning point came with the EU's fourth railway package, adopted in 2016. These rules required member states to open their domestic passenger markets to competition, both by allowing new operators to run commercial services and by introducing competitive tendering for publicly funded routes. But while the legislation was agreed earlier, its effects only started to become visible in the early 2020s, as countries began implementing these rules in practice. So, over the last 5 years, this long process has finally started to translate into real competition, at least in some parts of Europe. Countries like Italy and Spain have become the most prominent examples. On major high-speed routes, multiple operators now compete directly, leading to lower ticket prices, more frequent services, and a noticeable improvement in quality. In these markets, rail is starting to look more like aviation, with competing brands fighting for every passenger. Elsewhere, the picture is more uneven. In many EU countries, national operators still dominate, and meaningful competition has yet to emerge. Legal barriers may be gone, but practical obstacles, such as limited access to rolling stock, infrastructure constraints, and regulatory systems that still favor incumbents, still remain. If we take a closer look, we could notice two distinct models of competition. On one hand, open access operators run trains at their own commercial risk, usually on the most profitable high-speed routes, and tend to deliver the most visible benefits to passengers. Meanwhile, competitive tendering is used for subsidized PSO services, where governments select operators through bidding processes. This doesn't make the service profitable, but still reduces costs, improves quality, and relieves the pressure on the public funding. As a third case, there are countries in which there is no on-track competition, PSO rules formally apply, but in practice nothing has changed. In any case, we decided to take a deep dive into this issue and show you a few examples for each of the three previously mentioned situations. Let's start with Italy. Italy is widely seen as Europe's most successful rail liberalization story, as it is the only European country to have organized a head-on competition on its whole high-speed rail network. Competition began in 2012 when private operator Italo entered the market against state-owned Trenitalia. Over the past decade, this rivalry has intensified on routes like Milan to Rome to Naples, leading to lower prices, higher frequencies, and strong growth in ridership. Some reports claim that high-speed supply on the main corridors grew more than 45% since Italo showed up, and now we are having up to 170 high-speed trains each day between Rome and Milan, which is basically metro-level frequency on a 600-kilometer corridor. Also, multiple studies confirmed that not only the competition not split the demand, it rather massively expanded supply, while at the same time there is 30 to 40% decrease in fare prices. Both operators continuously upgrade their fleets and services, managing to compete and beat even air travel on key routes, especially the corridor from Turin and Milan through Bologna, Florence and Rome to Naples, as well as routes toward Venice and Salerno, thus becoming the default option for many travelers. Yet this duopoly may come to an end, but in a positive way. Namely, in 2024, the French national railway subsidiary, SNCF Voyageurs Italia, applied for train paths to run 4 Torino, Venezia trains per day and 9 Torino to Napoli trains per day, starting from 2026. However, SNCF encountered difficulties in negotiating train paths, as well as depot access, as it was initially offered only 30% of the paths requested and eventually only 15%. Although infrastructure manager RFI blamed this on a lack of capacity and grandfather rights, SNCF made a complaint to the competition authority, AGCM, in March 2025, triggering an investigation which has taken almost a year to complete. In March this year, the decision was made. RFI will assign SNCF a minimum of 18 train paths on high-speed routes for 10 years, in a move intended to make this entry into the market both effective and sustainable. In addition, RFI will have to amend the rules in its network statement to bring it in line with European principles on the efficient use of infrastructure, the protection of passengers' needs, and the promotion of competition. Therefore, new starting date for three-way competition in Italy is 2027, something similar to what we already have in Spain. Namely, Spain experienced a rapid transformation after fully opening its high-speed market and practically became Europe's most competitive high-speed rail market. The state operator Renfe, who has two brands, AV for premium and AVLO for low cost, was joined by two major competitors, Ouigo España and Irio. Ouigo is a subsidiary of French SNCF operating on a low-cost model, and Irio is backed by Trenitalia and Air Nostrum, operating on premium model of services. In just a few years, key routes like Madrid to Barcelona and Madrid to Valencia saw a surge in capacity from 50 to 100%, aggressive pricing strategies leading to lowering prices up to 40%, and a sharp increase in passenger numbers. If we look at the high-speed market as a whole, there is a 75% increase in the number of passengers compared to pre-liberalization 2019, and in 2024, for example, there was 39.6 million passengers on liberalized high-speed trains. And year-to-year increase is also significant, as in 2024 there was 22% more passengers than in 2023. Keep in mind that one-third of all high-speed rail traffic in Spain comes from Madrid-Barcelona corridor, where almost 15 million passengers are transported each year. Renfe still holds a majority share, 55%, but the remaining 45% is almost equally split between the competitors. Rail passenger competition in France is increasing rapidly through liberalization, breaking the historic SNCF monopoly. High-speed routes now feature competitors like Trenitalia and Renfe, while regional TER lines are being tendered to operators like Transdev, resulting in lower fares up to -18% and higher passenger numbers. Of course, Trenitalia entered the Paris-Lyon-Milan corridor in 2021, directly challenging SNCF on one of its busiest routes. Spain's Renfe entered the market in July 2023, running lines such as Lyon-Barcelona and Marseille-Madrid. As competition is mandated by the 2018 new Rail Pact, regions are transitioning to tendered contracts, with the first regional PSO contract won by an independent operator in 2025. Still, as contracts with the incumbent operator end by December 2033, only in the years to come we could see a real and complete market liberalization in this country. Anyway, new figures published by France's Région Sud show that its first competitively tendered regional PSO contract in the country, that was won by an independent operator, is already delivering impressive results. Early data showed that on the Marseille-Toulon-Nice corridor, passenger numbers have risen by 48%, while the average ticket price has fallen by 18% in the first 5 months of the new contract. This new PSO contract, operated by Transdev, replaced the former direct award to the historic incumbent with competitively tendering, clearly showing how effective regional rail can be when services are opened up to competition. Even with limited entry, Trenitalia introduced fares from €23 to €29 on its Paris to Lyon services, forcing SNCF to respond with more aggressive discounting and expansion of Ouigo brand. To those who aren't familiar, similarly to Renfe, SNCF also has two brands, TGV Inouï focusing on premium services, and Ouigo, a low-cost oriented operator. Let's now move to Austria, a smaller but notably more competitive market. the national operator ÖBB and its long-distance intercity services Railjet faces competition from Westbahn on key 300 km Vienna to Salzburg route and the new southern routes from Vienna to Graz and Klagenfurt as of March 2026. Over time, this rivalry has also led to improved service frequency and more competitive pricing. Westbahn operates relative minority of trains, only 8 to 12 trains per day compared to ÖBB's 20 to 30 plus depending on the timetable, but this competition contributed to 20 to 40% cheaper fare prices in recent years. It's good to mention that Westbahn market approach is using double-deck trains with 600 to 700 seats each, while Railjet usually offer 400 to 500 seats, meaning the competition not just price-based but also capacity-based. While ÖBB remains dominant, particularly in regional and subsidized transport, private operators have increased their presence, reaching a market share of roughly 12% in some segments. For Austria, it is important to note that it plays an important role in cross-border competition, with multiple operators running international services passing through the country, including German DB and Italian FS, making it a key hub in Central Europe's evolving rail market. Lest you think that the railway competition is only about high speed, there is the example of Czech Republic, which has one of the most competitive conventional rail markets in Europe. Alongside the state operator České dráhy, private companies RegioJet and Leo Express operate on major corridors for years, particularly the 350-kilometer-long Prague to Ostrava. Together, they operate 20 to 30 trains per day per direction, a high density for a non-high-speed line, with market shares split between 50 to 60% of České dráhy, 30 to 40% of RegioJet, and 5 to 10% of small but present Leo Express. Competition there has led to lower fares, sometimes starting from only 5 to 10 euros, and a total drop of up to 50% in prices compared to pre-liberalization period. Also, it brought higher service quality and strong innovation, especially in onboard services. Another example is Sweden, an early adopter of rail liberalization, which remains formally one of the most open markets in Europe. Namely, the Swedish state operator SJ competes with private and regional operators on both commercial and tendered routes on one of Europe's most used rail networks per capita, with as many as 160 to 170 million passenger journeys per year. SJ is a former state monopoly, now a state-owned commercial company, which dominates long-distance intercity services on most core routes like Stockholm to Gothenburg, Stockholm to Malmö, and Stockholm to Sundsvall. Besides, there is Snälltåget, a small-scale open-access competitor running long-distance services such as seasonal/international Stockholm to Malmö to Berlin and ski season peak Stockholm to Åre. On the other hand, regional services, which make up to 80% of all trains in Sweden, are widely tendered as PSO services. Namely, there are companies such as MTRX, a historical intercity competitor on Stockholm to Gothenburg, Transdev Sverige, and VR Group. They all compete for contracts to offer hundreds of regional trains on Stockholm to Gothenburg, Stockholm to Malmö, Stockholm to Uppsala, and others. The issues which might be relevant to mention are complaints from new entrants regarding access to the incumbents' booking systems and infrastructure capacity, which is a relatively common issue with passenger rail competition. With over 2.5 billion annual passengers, Germany is also one of Europe's largest passenger rail markets, but with limited open access competition. The market there is still dominated by Deutsche Bahn. However, private operators like Flixtrain have entered some long-distance routes, offering low-cost alternatives on routes such as Berlin to Cologne, Berlin to Stuttgart, and Hamburg-Cologne. Still, this is only 1 to 3% of all long-distance passengers, but private companies have introduced some price competition on key corridors. Also, by summer 2028, Italian Italo plans to enter the high-speed market with 26 Siemens trains, targeting major routes like Munich, Berlin, Hamburg. On the other hand, most regional services in Germany are competitively tendered, making it one of the largest markets for contract-based competition in Europe. Companies such as DB Regio, Transdev Germany, National Express Germany, and Abellio Rail all have a combined share of 30 to 40% of all PSO tendered routes. The Netherlands is an example of a country with practically no on-track competition and limited competition for the market. With 450 to 500 million rail passenger journeys per year, it has formally established a tender-based system, but the national operator NS dominates most services, especially those on Amsterdam to Rotterdam, Amsterdam to Utrecht to Eindhoven, Schiphol airport services, etc. Not only that, but the European Commission is even taking the Netherlands to court for directly awarding NS a 15-year contract in 2025, thus ensuring the monopoly on the main rail network, which, in the Commission's view, violates EU competition rules. The 90% of rail volumes in this country is practically under one main concession, NS, with largely regulated and standardized fares. Only about 10% of traffic on certain regional lines is operated by private companies such as Arriva, Keolis, and Cubos, which heavily protested the preferential treatment of NS, arguing it limits innovation and better pricing. Considering the Netherlands is one of the densest rail usage systems in Europe, with very high service frequency and quality, government's reasoning is that this approach guarantees stability and service continuity, as country indeed manages to achieve solid efficiency through strong central coordination. With up to 1.8 billion trips per year, the UK is one of Europe's largest rail markets. It is also one of the most unique and controversial rail systems in Europe, not because of open access competition, but because of its long experiment with full-scale privatization through franchising. Instead of one national operator, Britain uses a system branded as National Rail, with infrastructure managed separately by Network Rail, while train services are, or better said were, operated by multiple private companies under government contracts. In this system, from the mid-1990s, the state divided the network into franchises, and private companies bid to operate them for 7 to 10 years. Major operators included Avanti West Coast, Great Western Railway, Northern Trains, Southeastern, etc. Open access competition was small, with only a few operators outside the franchise system such as Hull Trains, Lumo, and Grand Central, holding just 1 to 2% of total passenger market on services London to Hull, London to Edinburgh, and others. However, after COVID, this franchising model effectively collapsed, and government decided to take over revenue risk in a major restructuring involving concession-style management contracts, applying central control via government body named Great British Railways. The idea is to move the whole system back toward public control. Still, the railways in the UK have a complex pricing system, rail fares among highest in Europe, and service quality which varies widely from operator to operator. Finally, Switzerland, as one of the most important counterexamples in the European rail story, has almost no competition, yet consistently delivers some of the best rail services in the world. Main operator Swiss Federal Railways, a state-owned company, operates the core national network with Intercity, Interregio, and other commuter services with guaranteed monopoly until 2029. Their trains carry 70 to 80% of all passengers, which is up to 500 million every year. There are multiple other rail companies such as BLSAG, Rhätische Bahn, and others, but they never compete on the same routes and operate their own networks or concessions. Still, Switzerland is known for its Taktfahrplan timetable, in which trains depart at fixed intervals every 30 or 60 minutes, with perfectly synchronized connections nationwide. Their network is integrated with other modes of transport, there is a single ticketing system, and frequent, reliable, and synchronized connections achieve 90 to 95% on-time performance on average. Also, EU-Switzerland negotiations are pushing for partial liberalization of international passenger services, which could increase competition on cross-border routes, a point of concern for Swiss unions. In any case, Switzerland proves a critical point. High-quality rail requires strict public procurement and negotiated targets rather than pure direct competition. Yet the question remains, can every country apply the Swiss model, or the competition offer a better chance for improving the service quality and frequency, lowering prices for passengers, reducing the public funding, and fostering innovation in railway transport? Let us know your opinion in the comments, and thank you for your attention. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more railway stories from around the world. To support the channel and gain access to exclusive extras, check out our Patreon page. You can also find our ebook packed with detailed railway insights. The link is in the description below. And if you're into railway-themed merch, we've got you covered there too. See you in the next video.